Hello, my name is Delith Kincaid. 2 months ago, I watched a video of my own funeral. Casket, candles, photo, the whole show. My father read my obituary, called me a troubled child. My sister stood in pearls, accepted my inheritance, and smiled for the camera like she'd earned it. No one called to check if I was okay. No one wondered if maybe, just maybe, I was still breathing. They buried me on paper, and they thought that would be the end of me. But what happens when the girl they erased walks back into the room? Would you like to know how it felt to stand at the altar where your family pretended you no longer existed? It started like any other Wednesday. The sky over Seattle hung low, a dull steel blanket, the kind that pressed in on you whether you were outside or not. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, sifting through the last of the quarterly reports on my laptop, sipping lukewarm coffee I'd forgotten twice in the microwave. Nothing dramatic. Just another rainy evening spent alone, surrounded by silent appliances and unopened mail. And then my phone lit up. A message, not a text, not an email, a video, sent directly to my phone from a contact that hadn't appeared in years. Mrs. Keaton. She was the neighbor across the street from our old house in Charlottesville. She used to leave lemon bars at our front door every Easter. She once slipped me $20 after my high school graduation and said, "You're gonna need it more than your sister ever will." I didn't hesitate to open it. I wish I had. It wasn't a greeting, not a check-in after all these years, just a simple line of text. "I'm so sorry about your family. I didn't know they would." Then the video rolled. I saw it before I could process what it meant, the arched wooden doors of St. Albans standing wide open. The place where I'd sat through 100 Christmas Eves, my hands wrapped around hot cocoa while the choir hummed Silent Night. The camera panned slowly down the aisle, and my stomach turned inside out. There was a casket, not someone's wedding white, not a closed case for someone elderly. It was black, trimmed in silver. Next to it, on an easel, was a photo of me. One I recognized. I was wearing a green silk blouse I'd bought for a conference 4 years ago. Someone had softened the lighting, made me look angelic. My mother was sitting in the front pew, head bowed. My father stood at the pulpit, wearing a suit I'd only ever seen at board meetings. He held a sheet of paper. His hands were steady. His voice was not cracked, not trembling. It was flat, rehearsed. She was always troubled, but we loved her. We did all we could. My heart didn't race. It stopped. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a sharp smack that echoed across the tile, and I just stared at it for a full minute, afraid to pick it up, afraid to rewind, afraid to confirm that I had just watched my father deliver my eulogy at a funeral I hadn't died for. I eventually forced myself to watch it again. And again. They held a service. They wore black. They lit candles and printed brochures. They called me dead. I sat on the floor of my apartment for a long time, just breathing, or trying to. My fingers were ice. My head buzzed. I hadn't spoken to them in almost 3 years, not since the night they told me I was no longer part of this family. But this was another level. I grabbed my laptop. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was some kind of weird church play, or a memorial for someone else with my name. I typed in my full name, Delith Kincaid, into the search bar. Obituary. My face. My birth date. The words, sudden passing and auto accident, stared back at me. It had been published in the Charlottesville Daily, signed by Alban and Verena Varelli, my parents. The same people who had erased me before, only this time, they'd done it on paper. I tried logging into my old email to see if I'd missed anything, if someone had reached out to me, if this was a prank or a mistake. The system returned. This account has been deactivated due to user decease. Then I tried to retrieve my medical history, just to confirm that I existed somewhere. It came back no active file on record. I was gone, officially, legally, entirely. I walked into the bathroom, stared at my reflection, touched my own pulse, still here, still real, but not, apparently, in the eyes of the government or my family. They hadn't just abandoned me, They buried me. 3 years ago, they accused me of stealing from the family business. A discrepancy in the budget appeared, and no one wanted to hear that I'd been warning them about it for months. That it was likely Callista who'd manipulated the numbers. She always had access, always knew how to charm Dad into thinking she was the golden child. When I tried to confront them, my mother shook her head like I was an ugly rumor. My father said, "You embarrassed this family. You are no longer part of it." The next morning, I packed a bag, left the key on the counter, and walked out without a goodbye. No screaming, no threats, just shame. I disappeared into Seattle and never looked back, until now. But now, they'd done the one thing I couldn't ignore. They made it official. They staged my death, gave away my legacy, and didn't even send a text to say, "We're sorry you're gone." I called Rowan, my cousin, the only person who used to sneak me candy at family picnics. No answer. I left a voicemail, shaky but calm. "Hey, it's Delith. I don't know if you've heard something weird, but I'm not dead. Call me back." He didn't. I called my father's office. Straight to voicemail. I emailed my aunt. The message bounced back. No one called me, not one person. I sat on my kitchen floor until it was well past midnight. I hadn't turned on the lights. The rain kept tapping at the windows, like it, too, was waiting for an answer. I felt everything and nothing. Then, I did what anyone would do when they need to know the truth. I Googled myself. My name was listed on public death records. My social security number had been frozen. A closed casket service was held at St. Albans Church on July 22nd. Tragic accident while traveling abroad. The obituary said the body wasn't recovered. Cremation followed. All arrangements by Varelli Family Trust. They crafted a story, a disappearance, a loss, a closure they could cry about without confronting what they'd done. They didn't lose me. They killed me, just not with their hands. I sat very still, rereading that obituary, every word written like a nail in a coffin I never climbed into. They gave me a death I hadn't earned, so I decided to give them a truth they couldn't bury. I didn't sleep that night, or the next one. The video haunted me, not just the image of the casket or my father's voice echoing inside that church, but the quiet confidence in how completely they'd carried it all out. They didn't seem shaken. There were no tears, no stutters, no hesitations. It was as if they'd rehearsed my death a dozen times before bringing in an audience. I kept replaying that line in my head, over and over again like a broken record that refused to skip. She lost her way. We did all we could. The tone wasn't sorrow. It was resignation. Final, polished, public. It was almost morning when I finally moved from the couch. I hadn't even realized I'd fallen asleep sitting upright. My back ached, and my eyes were raw from the screen's glow. The rain had stopped, but Seattle still carried that heavy, damp smell of pavement and pines that stuck to your skin. I made coffee I barely touched and sat at my dining table in silence. In the daylight, the reality felt sharper, more bitter. If they'd chosen to mourn me in private, to quietly grieve or even deny my place in the family, that would have been one kind of cruelty. But this? They held a funeral, in public, in front of neighbors and friends. They put my face on a stand and eulogized me like I was a stain they'd finally scrubbed out of the family portrait. I opened my laptop and typed in Kincaid Virelli funeral on social media. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe nothing. But what I found was worse than any silence. Photos. Not one or two, dozens. Callista, my sister, was standing near the casket with a hand over her heart, mascara perfectly streaked as if she'd practiced in front of a mirror. My mother in black lace, holding a lace-trimmed handkerchief. My father clasping his hands solemnly, like he was accepting a congressional medal for surviving my existence. There was a photo collage beside the casket, the kind people put together with baby pictures and graduation caps. I clicked to enlarge it. My jaw tightened. They'd edited me out of my own memories. One image used to show me standing on the front porch of our childhood home, between my mother and the dog we had growing up. In this version, I was gone. The dog was still there, tail wagging. My mother looked the same, but where I once stood, they'd airbrushed me out. Or worse, replaced me with Callista, wearing the same pink cardigan I remembered from that day. Another photo had been taken from our trip to Myrtle Beach. We'd spent 3 days there, our last family vacation before things fell apart. That trip had been full of tension. My mother barely looked at me. Callista pouted the entire time. And yet, here was the image now. A sunny day, Callista smiling on the sand, a caption beneath it reading, "One of her favorite moments with her sister." Only, I wasn't in the picture. Because I hadn't been there? No. Because they'd edited me out of it. Callista had posted that photo just 2 days after the funeral. They weren't just mourning me, they were revising me. I swallowed hard, pushing the bile back down my throat. If they could strip me from the photos, from the stories, from the online records, what was next? Would I vanish from our high school yearbook? From the college alumni site? From the legal documents I'd signed over the years? I opened another tab and searched for the obituary. This time, I read every word slowly. It began innocently enough. Delith Kincaid passed away unexpectedly while traveling. But the lines that followed turned my stomach. She struggled quietly with mental health challenges for years, and while her path was often difficult, she was deeply loved by her family. What a neat little bow they tied around the mess they created. It wasn't grief, it was narrative control. My father had made me the cautionary tale, an example to uphold Callista as the one who made the right choices. The strong one, the grateful daughter. He didn't just bury me, he rewrote who I had been. I closed the laptop, hands trembling again. It wasn't until the following afternoon that I found myself searching county property records. I hadn't intended to. I was looking for something else, anything else. But a few clicks later, I was staring at a property deed. The house I grew up in, brick, ivy-covered, white shutters Callista and I used to repaint every spring, was no longer under my parents' name. It was now registered solely under Callista Varelli. The deed said, "Passed in loving memory from Alban Varelli, custodian of the Varelli Trust, to surviving daughter Callista Varelli." There it was. Surviving daughter. Not only had they declared me dead, but they had used that death to legally move property. I was no longer just erased emotionally. I had been wiped from the ledger, too. I felt something shift in my chest. An ache, yes, but sharper now. Less sorrow, more precision, like something broken clicking back into place. I picked up my phone and sent a text to my father. "Why would you do this?" No response. 10 minutes later, I called my mother, straight to voicemail. I drafted an email, a long one. I wrote out the timeline, the lies, the photos. I asked no questions. I made no accusations. I simply laid it all out and asked, "Was it worth it?" Then I stared at it for 20 minutes and deleted it. They didn't deserve the satisfaction of silence, but they didn't deserve my words either. It wasn't about getting answers anymore. I wasn't looking for closure. I was looking to take back something they stole from me, the last ounce of dignity, the part of me that refused to die quietly, the part of me that remembered who I really was before they tried to reshape it. They wrote my ending. Now I would write the sequel. I didn't know it was possible to feel both invisible and violated at the same time, like watching someone try on your skin and wear it better than you ever could. But that's exactly how it felt. After another restless night, I sat in my living room, the morning sun doing its best to sneak through the gray haze outside. I opened my phone out of habit, not even sure what I was looking for anymore. An explanation maybe, or someone accidentally telling the truth. That's when I saw the video. It was buried in a post from the Varelli Foundation's event recap. A small reception had followed my so-called funeral, apparently at a country club in Charlottesville. Linen-covered tables, white roses, finger foods served on slate trays. In the center of it all, my family, mingling as if they'd just wrapped up a political fundraiser. And there was my father, holding a glass of red wine, standing before a room of half-sympathetic strangers and old social connections. He cleared his throat and offered the same smile I'd seen him give board members when closing a deal. "We are grateful for the one daughter who always made us proud, Callista." Laughter followed. Applause. Someone even raised a glass in her direction. No one flinched. No one paused. Not a single face in the room looked confused or hesitant. They believed every word. They believed that I was the problem and that she was the prize. Something burned behind my eyes, but I refused to cry. Not anymore. I set my phone down and opened my laptop. I typed my name again, Delith Kincaid, just to see what the world still remembered about me. Most of the top results now linked to obituaries, news coverage of the tragic loss, and a few tributes on community boards that read more like polite lies than heartfelt memories. But one press release caught my attention. In loving memory of Delith Kincaid, the Virelli family accepts the 2023 Community Builder Grant bestowed to Callista Virelli, who has vowed to continue her late sister's legacy. My jaw locked. I clicked through the release, the project being awarded. It was mine. I'd spent 2 years designing a community redevelopment analysis for low-income neighborhoods around Charlottesville. The final proposal was on my old hard drive. I'd shared early drafts with my father when I still worked with him, hoping, naively, that it might bridge something between us. He barely glanced at them back then. Now, Callista had taken it, rebranded it under her social media initiative, and collected an award using my name. She stood in the photo, plaque in hand, a solemn look on her face like she was mourning a war hero, not a sister she helped erase. I slammed the laptop shut. The heat under my skin wasn't rage yet, it was something quieter, colder, calculated. That evening, as the wind picked up and clouds turned charcoal outside my window, I curled up with a notebook and let myself remember. 2 years ago, we'd had dinner at a downtown restaurant to celebrate a local business award Callista received for her female-led influencer brand. It was a small gathering, just family and a few of my father's colleagues. I was there mostly out of obligation. At that point, I'd already been quietly edged out of most family conversations. Still, I'd brought a printout of the draft proposal for the redevelopment project. I thought it would be the right moment to finally show my father the work I'd been doing. Something real, something that might redeem whatever crack had formed between us. I barely got 3 sentences in. Callista cut me off mid-word, waving her phone with some social media metrics, gushing about a podcast interview she'd just landed. Everyone's attention turned to her. My mother beamed. My father raised his glass and said, "Callista has always known how to connect with people." That was the moment. That was when I stopped being a daughter and became a shadow in the room. I sat there smiling, sipping my wine, pretending I wasn't drowning in silence. Now, flipping through her social media, it was all there. The tributes to her lost sister, the curated grief, the borrowed legacy. She'd even posted a childhood photo of us, side by side, except I recognized the editing. My face was softened, brightened. Her face was sharper, glowing. The caption read, "Every project I pursue is inspired by the sister I lost too soon. I miss her every day." Lies. She didn't miss me. She missed the opportunity to steal more from me while I was alive. Death was more convenient. Every comment underneath was a gut punch. "You're so strong for carrying on her legacy." She'd be so proud of you, Callista. A true example of family love and healing. No, 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 no. This wasn't love. This was rebranding. Repurposing. She didn't want to mourn me. She wanted to be me, minus all the messy parts that made me human. She used my name to boost her brand, my death to sweeten her narrative, my silence to position herself as a survivor of a sister who, by her version of events, struggled too much to be saved. I wasn't just cut out. I'd been replaced, not with a better daughter, not even with a different one, just with a fabricated version of me that wore Callista's face. I closed her profile. My hands felt like stone. This wasn't grief. This was conquest. They didn't just bury me to forget me, they buried me to use me. I stood from the couch and paced my apartment, unsure of what I was looking for, but certain I couldn't sit still anymore. I had to move. I had to think. They thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd stay gone, that I wouldn't have the spine to speak up again. They forgot something important. The dead don't care about making people uncomfortable, and I was done pretending to be anything but alive. The moment I decided to fight back, something inside me shifted. Not a grand, cinematic explosion, no dramatic monologue in front of a mirror. Just a quiet, sharp click, like a lock turning. It happened while I was still standing in my apartment, the light from my laptop glowing across the floor like a line I had finally stepped over. I didn't start by calling anyone. I didn't scream. I didn't send angry texts or bang on office doors. I did what anyone with half a brain and a bit of trauma would do. I opened the Virginia State Property Records website. If they had taken my life on paper, I wanted to see what else they'd stolen with it. It didn't take long. A few minutes, a few clicks, a few typos corrected, and there it was. The final nail in the coffin I never laid in. My family home, the house I'd grown up in, scraped my knees in, memorized every floorboard creak in, had been legally transferred to Callista. The document was dated just 48 hours after the funeral. Transfer of ownership approved per confirmation of sole surviving heir. I read the phrase 3 times. It didn't change. I hadn't just been declared dead. I'd been converted, turned into a tool to move assets, clean up loose ends. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a liability they'd finally offloaded. I copied the case number down and opened another tab. This time, it was the estate attorney's firm. I sent an email. Short. Professional. Hello, I am requesting the complete record of all legal filings made regarding the estate of Daleth Kincaid, whose death was declared without proper verification. Please note that I am, in fact, alive. Not 5 minutes later, I received an automatic reply. This case is closed per death certificate ARF 91327. No further access is permitted. I stared at that line for what felt like an hour. That wasn't just stonewalling, that was structure. A machine built to keep the wrong people out and the right lies in. I picked up the phone and called the Charlottesville County Courthouse. The woman who answered was polite at first, until I gave her my name. Sorry, ma'am, I can't provide any information. Your name is listed in our system as deceased. Well, I'm calling you, aren't I? I understand, but unless the declaration is legally overturned, our records are locked. I could have screamed. Instead, I thanked her and hung up. They had sealed me out of my own existence. Everywhere I turned, my death was more real to the system than my life. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside just to breathe something other than the artificial air of disappointment. Seattle was damp as usual, but the clouds had thinned. I walked around the block twice before coming home and collapsing on the couch, the kind of collapse that's half gravity, half defeat. And then I remembered the obituary. I hadn't read it all the way through, not properly, just enough to confirm my name, the lie of a car accident, the familiar date. But now, I wanted to feel their words, to see how they twisted the truth into something palatable for the public. I found it on the website of the Charlottesville Daily. The formatting was clean, the headline simple. Daleth Kincaid, 35, remembered for her early promise and private struggles. My breath caught. She battled quietly with her inner demons. In her passing, we hope she found peace. That's what they printed. They turned me into a cautionary tale, a footnote in their pursuit of appearing brave and burdened. No mention of what I actually did. No mention of the projects I created. Just the story of a sweet child who lost her way. I never battled addiction. I never disappeared. I had fought to survive on my own, rebuild my life in another city, find a sense of peace that they had refused me. But apparently, the only peace they respected was the kind they gave me through a fake obituary. I stood up and walked to the window. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. Life continued. A year ago, I'd gone back to Charlottesville for a weekend. Quietly. I didn't tell anyone. I just needed to see it. I remember driving past the old house. It was dusk. The lights were on. I could hear laughter through the window, familiar voices that had once filled every corner of my childhood. I stood at the gate for nearly 15 minutes. Not one person came outside. No one saw me. Or maybe they did and chose not to. That part still stings. Now I realize they had already decided I didn't exist. Even then. That night, I booked a return flight to Seattle and swore I'd never look back. But looking back was the only way to move forward now. I logged into my old Yahoo email. Yes, I still had one. Barely remembered the password, but a recovery text later and I was in. There were hundreds of messages, most junk, some untouched newsletters. but one caught my eye. Subject line: Estate resolution, final documents attached. It had been sent 3 days after the funeral. It was CC'd to me. That meant, at least for a moment, someone hadn't updated the system. Someone still thought I was alive. I clicked it open. It was a full digital packet: legal verbiage, PDFs of the property transfer, the financial account breakdown, the speech Callista planned to give at the reception titled "My Sister's Legacy." There it was in black and white. Not only had she accepted the award in my name, she'd scripted it. It wasn't impromptu. It wasn't grief-driven. It was pre-written and approved by PR consultants. I closed the laptop again, but this time I wasn't shaking. This time, I wasn't sad. I was sharp. I was grounded. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat back down with my notebook. I opened a new page and began to write. You signed my death into law. You will hear from me again. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a statement of record. I didn't hit send yet. I didn't need to. Just knowing the words existed was enough, for now, because whatever grief I'd carried up until this point had officially ended. What remained was strategy. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday. 3 days had passed since I told myself I'd no longer sit quietly in the corner of my own erasure. 3 days of combing through state databases, confirming what I already knew. They had taken everything: my home, my name, my identity. But what I didn't know was that someone else had been watching too. It was early evening when I found it. I'd just returned from a quiet walk around the neighborhood. I needed the air, the movement, anything to keep my mind from spiraling into that tight, airless space it had occupied since I saw the obituary. I hadn't even noticed the package at first. It was thin, tucked under a flyer for gutter cleaning and a pizza coupon I'd never use. No return address, no markings, just my name, written in pen. Inside, folded once with surgical precision, was a yellow post-it note, a short sentence, 5 words. Check the transfers, account 01447. Below it was a name I hadn't seen in a long time, Miriam. Her script was unmistakable, tilted slightly left, every T crossed perfectly. Miriam had worked for our family for nearly 20 years. She'd been there through chickenpox, spelling bees, teenage fights, and college departures. She knew how to be invisible, but she also saw everything. I sat with the note in my hand, staring at it like it had just fallen from the sky. The account number sparked something, a vague recollection of a financial setup from years back. An account opened in my name during college, supposedly for emergency funds, though I never touched it after graduation. I turned on my desk lamp and reached for my laptop. This wasn't something I could ignore. 10 minutes later, I was on a video call with Claire, a friend who now worked for a regional bank based out of Oregon. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, but when I texted her, she responded within 5 minutes. She always had a soft spot for people with a score to settle. When she appeared on screen, she raised a brow. "Delith, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Close. More like I am one." I held up the post-it. "I need to trace this account. Quietly, I think it's been used illegally." Claire adjusted her glasses. "You realize I'm not supposed to do this, right?" "I know. But you also know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." She paused, then nodded. "Give me a few minutes." I waited. The cursor blinked in the chat window while I tried to keep my breathing steady. I watched the raindrops trail down the window like slow-moving truths. Finally, Claire came back on. "The account was opened under your name. That part's legit. It stayed untouched for years. But 6 months ago, boom, every cent transferred out." "To where?" "An LLC, private, newly formed." She typed. "Name is, wait, you're not going to like this." "Tell me." "Varelli Community Foundation." My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I didn't need to ask who set that up. Callista, of course. Claire leaned forward. "Delith, this isn't just a family dispute. This is financial fraud, identity abuse." If they declared you dead and moved your money— I know, I said quietly. They didn't just kill me on paper. They cleaned out what was left of me. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of my phone lighting the sheets every time I reread the bank record Claire had sent. It didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt surgical, cold, like someone had put on gloves and removed me piece by piece. By morning, I'd made my decision. No yelling, no calls, no tears, just action. I spent the afternoon drafting a formal notice. I printed it on real paper, the kind with a slight tooth to it, something that couldn't be deleted or ignored with the swipe of a screen. I wrote every word carefully, not emotional, not threatening, just facts. To the estate attorney representing the Varelli Trust and all related assets. This letter serves as formal notification that I, Delith Kincaid, am alive. The declaration of death filed under my name is fraudulent and must be revoked. I demand immediate access to all documentation filed on my behalf or in my name following said declaration. You have 72 hours to respond. Failing to do so will result in legal action. I signed my full name, not D. Kincaid, not a digital signature. Delith. Goddamn. Kincaid. I drove to the post office, handed it to the clerk, and requested registered mail with delivery confirmation. I watched him stamp it like sealing a verdict. Afterward, I sat in my car for a few moments, hands on the wheel, engine running but unmoving. I thought about the first time my father taught me how to drive. I was 16. It was a Saturday. He'd been unusually patient that day. We stalled 3 times at the same stop sign, and he never once raised his voice. "You're overthinking it," he said. "The car responds better when you trust it." I wondered now how long he'd stopped trusting me, or if he ever did. I pulled out my phone. I didn't even realize I was dialing his number until it started ringing. It rang, once, twice. Then I heard his voice, recorded, composed, a tone so familiar it made my chest ache. "If this is about the estate, speak with Callista's attorney." That was it. No, hi. No, I'm sorry. No, you're alive? Not even my name. I let the line go silent, then ended the call. I sat there in the parking lot and remembered another moment, buried deep, my 13th birthday. It had snowed. My mother was sick, and Callista had locked herself in the bathroom because her friends bailed on her party plans. I'd cried quietly in my room, trying not to be a burden. And then, he knocked. My father, holding a lopsided chocolate cake with deli written in shaky frosting. "I tried," he said with a rare crooked smile. It was the only time I ever remember him trying to do something for me alone. Now, that same man couldn't say my name, couldn't even acknowledge my breath. But someone had. Miriam. She had seen. She had noticed. She had broken her own silence to drop a clue. Small, silent, and sharp as a pin. And that was enough. Enough to remind me that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't alone, that someone, somewhere still knew what they had done. This wasn't just a family wound anymore. This was evidence. And now, I had the first strike. It came through my mailbox on a Thursday afternoon, tucked between a real estate flyer and a takeout menu from a Vietnamese place I'd never tried. No envelope, no explanation, just a single card printed on heavy cream paper with black embossed letters. Memorial service for Delith Kincaid, Sunday, 10 a.m., St. Albans Episcopal Church, Charlottesville. No name, no sender. But I knew. They wanted a second funeral, an official one. Something bigger, something public, maybe to appease the community, maybe to raise funds for Callista's foundation, maybe just to wash away whatever guilt still lingered beneath their curated grief. Either way, I was done letting them choreograph the script. I stared at that card until the ink felt seared into my brain, then slid it into my notebook. By the next morning, I was already packing. I didn't tell anyone, not even Claire. Some moments demand silence, like a match held just long enough to feel the heat before it's thrown into gasoline. But by Saturday, I was back in Virginia. My old state, my old name, my old ghosts. The hotel was nothing fancy. just off a quiet highway, all beige curtains and low-hum lobby music. I checked in under my real name for the first time in years. It felt strange, defiant, almost sacred. That evening, I met briefly with a local attorney. She came recommended from a friend of a friend. Didn't ask too many questions. She didn't flinch when I laid out the documents. She didn't raise an eyebrow when I handed her a sealed manila folder marked, "In case I don't come back." She only asked one thing. "Are you sure you want to do this in person?" I looked her straight in the eyes. They declared me dead. I want them to see what that looks like when it walks in the door. She nodded. Respectful. Quiet. I liked her. That night, I barely slept. Not from fear. No, fear was old news. I was simply charged, like the air before a storm. My body couldn't decide whether it wanted to cry or crack lightning. By morning, I was ready. I wore black. Not morning black, but the kind of sleek, sharp black that meant business. Slacks, blazer, hair pulled back tight, no jewelry, no perfume, just purpose. In my hand, I carried a leather folder. Inside, my passport, current lease agreement, pay stubs, medical records, digital banking screenshots, life, proof. I arrived 10 minutes before the service began. The parking lot at St. Albans was full. Black sedans, Lexus SUVs, old Volvos. Every car I remembered from garden club meetings, charity brunches, and PTA fundraisers was here. Familiar people wearing the faces of strangers. I didn't park. I stayed across the street, standing in the shadow of a bookstore that had long since closed. I watched as people walked in, some hugged, some dabbed at already damp eyes. I spotted my mother, clutching her purse like it held something fragile. My father walked 2 steps ahead of her, shoulders rigid. Callista was at the door, shaking hands, dressed like a widow. When the church bells chimed 10, I crossed the street. I waited. The priest stood at the pulpit, speaking in soft, rehearsed tones. "Let us now take a moment of silence in honor of Delith Kincaid." And I opened the doors. The sound was subtle at first, just the creak of wood, the hush of surprise, but then it spread like a ripple in still water. People turned, one by one, gasps, hands flying to mouths. I stepped inside. My heels echoed down the center aisle. I didn't rush. I didn't shrink. To my left, someone whispered, "Is that?" Callista froze mid-sentence near the altar, the glass in her hand trembling before it slipped and shattered on the tile. My mother's face drained of color, and she slumped backward. Whether she fainted or pretended to, I didn't care. My father didn't move. I walked all the way to the front. On the easel beside the pulpit was a large framed photo of me. Soft lighting, fake flowers, the kind of image you see at a high-end funeral home. Beneath it, "Gone too soon, forever remembered." I stepped in front of it. I turned, faced the crowd, and slowly removed my sunglasses. Dead silence. I opened the folder and placed it on the lectern. Then I looked up. "My name is Delith Kincaid. I'm not dead." A few gasps. One woman stood up as if she'd just realized she was in the wrong room. "I heard you all came here to grieve me," I continued. "That's generous, especially since not one of you reached out when I left." I flipped open the folder. Passport stamp from last month. I held it up. Lease renewal from March. Pay stub from Friday. Medical insurance card, current and active. Bank account activity. Tax documents. With each page, the lie unraveled. I looked at my father. "You signed my death into law. I'm here to undo it. With facts, not flowers." Callista opened her mouth, maybe to speak, maybe to faint like mother, but nothing came out. "I didn't come here for forgiveness. I didn't come here to cause a scene. I came to make a correction." I picked up my own photo from the easel and held it in my hands. "This?" I said. "This isn't me. This is a narrative. And I'm reclaiming mine." I turned toward the priest. "I apologize for interrupting your service. But you see, it's hard to honor a lie while the truth is still breathing." He nodded, stunned, and took a step back. I walked past my family, mother still limp, father still frozen, sister still hollow. I left the folder on the pulpit and walked out into the light. I didn't go back to the hotel right away. After I walked out of the church, I sat in my car, parked 3 blocks away on a side street lined with old oaks and sagging porches. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched the rearview mirror for nearly an hour. No one followed. Not a single text. Not even a call. They were probably still inside, reeling, if not from the shock of seeing me, then from the realization that the lies they'd been feeding people for over a year had just cracked wide open in front of the very community they tried to impress. By the time I made it back to the hotel, my phone was already vibrating. It started slow. One message, a missed call, a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, then 2 more, then a dozen. People I hadn't heard from in years, high school acquaintances, a woman I'd interned with at a nonprofit in D.C., even one of my old professors from UVA. And then I saw it. My face. Not the one from the church photo, soft-lit and overly sanitized. No, this was me walking down the aisle in real time, stepping between rows of pews, documents in hand, voice clear and measured. Someone had recorded the whole thing. I didn't know who. Maybe a mourner. Maybe someone who just couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was already on TikTok. Captioned, "Woman walks into her own funeral." It had 2.3 million views in less than 2 days. People didn't believe it at first. Some thought it was performance art. Others said it was fake, AI, a skit, a prank. But then someone shared a clip from the reception, the one with my father saying, "We are grateful for the one daughter who always made us proud, Callista." The video cuts to my sister, glass in hand, frozen, then dropping it when I walked in. Suddenly, people weren't laughing. They were angry. Comments flooded in. Wait, they really staged her death? She was alive and they still threw a funeral? Did they steal her identity too? This is why people don't trust family. The hashtag started trending by morning. Hashtag justice for Delith, Nash, dead but not gone, Sash, living proof. I didn't post. I didn't even comment. I just watched. Because for the first time, the silence wasn't mine. It was theirs. And that silence started crumbling faster than I expected. Callista tried to defend herself. She posted a video from her living room, her face carefully bare, eyes red but makeup-free. She was unwell, she said, voice trembling just enough. We thought she left permanently. We were told. But the internet doesn't forget. Screenshots of donation pages tied to her foundation surfaced. Receipts, invoices, contracts. One of the Reddit sleuths found the LLC registration under her name, filed 4 months after my supposed death. Someone else posted her LinkedIn listing my old projects under legacy initiatives inspired by my late sister. It all fell apart from there. Brands dropped her. Sponsorships vanished. She posted a statement blaming poor communication and emotional trauma. It didn't work. My parents, true to form, tried to spin it through someone else. A PR firm released a generic 2-paragraph statement. This has been a misunderstanding fueled by grief. The Varelli family kindly asks for privacy during this difficult time. The audacity. They declared me dead, stole everything, and now they wanted privacy. Verena lost her ambassadorship with 2 local charities within 24 hours. Alban was removed from the Regional Economic Development Board he'd sat on for over a decade. Their carefully curated image of a respectable philanthropic family had been dismantled in 72 hours by nothing more than the truth and a cell phone video. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Every time someone tried to defend them, someone else dropped a link, a document, a quote, a date that didn't line up. I'd spent 3 years being erased. Now I was becoming undeniable. Articles followed, first on smaller blogs, then local news stations, then the Washington Post. One piece titled, "How Families Erase the Ones Who Don't Obey." Another, "She Walked into Her Own Funeral. Now the internet wants justice." But the one that made me pause, really pause, was written by a woman named Samira Ellis. She ran a podcast I vaguely recognized. Her headline read, "Social Death is Real. Ask Delith Kincaid." It hit me harder than the videos, the views, the outrage, because that's exactly what it had been, a social death, a burial in stages, not just in legal records, but in whispers, in family group texts, In the way no one asked where I went, no one questioned why I disappeared. They hadn't just removed me. They'd rewritten me into a cautionary tale. And the world had bought it. Until now. I received a message in my inbox 2 days later. Professional. Respectful. From Samira herself. Subject line, telling the truth, on your terms. She offered me a seat on her podcast. Full editorial control. I could choose the questions. Review the episode before release. No gotcha journalism. Just my voice. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't scared. I just needed time. Because this wasn't just about telling my story anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost until I stepped into that church. My voice. People kept saying I was brave, that I'd stood up against injustice, that I'd become a symbol. But I didn't feel like a symbol. I felt like a woman who had been pushed too far for too long and had finally, quietly, stepped back into the light. I sat at my desk with the email still open and whispered to myself, not my story, their cover-up. Then I hit reply. By the time I walked into my attorney's office 2 weeks after the funeral, the fire inside me wasn't rage anymore. It had cooled into something colder, cleaner. A kind of resolve that sits just behind your ribs and doesn't flinch when names are spoken aloud. The receptionist barely looked up. She'd seen me before, just not like this. I wore a blazer, hair up. No makeup, no mask. I handed her the manila folder and said calmly, "We're filing everything." She nodded, picked up the phone and buzzed through. 5 minutes later, I was seated across from Camille Lister, a no-nonsense litigator with clipped speech and a knack for legal strategy that felt like watching a wolf sharpen its teeth. We reviewed the complaints one by one, civil and criminal. Count 1, fraudulent declaration of death. Count 2, identity theft. Count 3, misappropriation of assets. Count 4, emotional distress and reputational damage. The evidence, lined up in black and white, was devastating. Camille tapped her pen against the affidavit. They moved fast. It's like they knew what to do. They did, I replied, because this wasn't an accident. It was a plan. She didn't ask me to explain that. She'd seen enough cases to recognize when the wounds were still fresh, but no longer bleeding. We filed. By the end of that week, subpoenas had been issued. And investigations opened. And suddenly, the silence I'd carried for years was echoed back by lawyers, clerks, and officials who started calling me by my name again. Delith Kincaid. Alive. Breathing. Legal. The first domino to fall was Callista. Her foundation's bank account was frozen within 3 days of the lawsuit. Then came the sponsors, clothing lines, health supplements, that fake meditation app she always promoted on Instagram. They all pulled out. Publicly. Her PR agent dropped her in a statement so curt, it felt like a breakup text. We no longer represent Miss Varelli due to legal concerns. By the weekend, her social media pages were either locked or deactivated. But it didn't stop the screenshots from circulating. Photos of her accepting awards in my name, statements she'd made about carrying on my sister's work. It was all unraveling. Then it reached Alban. The man who once signed my report cards with a red fountain pen was now facing scrutiny for signing my death certificate using a doctor whose license had expired in 2015. The Economic Development Board held an emergency meeting. He didn't attend. The next morning, he left his office, told his assistant he was stepping out for coffee. He never returned. Some said he flew out to Arizona. Others whispered about a private clinic in Europe. I didn't care. He left the same way he'd handled everything for the last 3 years, by disappearing when accountability came knocking. Verena was next. She'd tried to maintain the narrative longer than anyone, playing the grieving mother, citing mental health, posting curated black and white photos of her girls on Facebook. But when a 2018 interview resurfaced, a panel discussion where she said plainly, "I have 2 daughters, but only one makes me sleep at night," the mask slipped. 3 major fundraisers uninvited her. One charity scrubbed her from their website completely. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just sat back and watched the system they built collapse from the weight of its own arrogance. And still, I didn't speak. Not yet. Camille called me that Thursday afternoon. They're requesting mediation. No, I said. They're offering a settlement. No, she exhaled. You sure? I don't want their hush money. I want the truth to exist louder than their lies ever did. That night, I wrote a letter. Not an email, not a tweet. A letter, pen on paper. I addressed it to no one. I sealed it in an envelope and handed it to Camille the next day. She read it aloud, sitting at the head of a long, polished conference table with my legal team on one side and two stiff-faced attorneys representing my family on the other. They squirmed, but they listened. I didn't come back for forgiveness. I didn't show up to mend what was already broken. You declared me dead. I just returned the favor, legally. There was silence afterward, no rebuttals, no eye contact. The next day, my story aired. The interview wasn't flashy, no dramatic music, no staged tears, just me, seated in a simple chair, speaking plainly. The host asked questions with care, but didn't avoid the hard ones. I answered each with honesty. Calm, no vitriol, no theatrics. Yes, they forged documents. Yes, they claimed my accounts. Yes, they held a funeral while I was alive. No, I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I ended the segment with a sentence I hadn't rehearsed, but knew in my bones. You can take a person's name, their voice, even their past, but you don't get to keep their life. Not anymore. When the camera stopped, the producer turned to me and said, "That's going to hit people where it matters." I nodded, because it already had. I left the studio alone, stepping into the sunlight like I hadn't done in years. This wasn't freedom, not fully, but it was something close. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving someone else's decisions. I was living mine. The courthouse hallway smelled like old paper and lemon disinfectant. I stood there for a moment after it was over. Settlement signed, judgment rendered, everything tucked neatly into a folder that now sat beneath my arm like a tombstone etched with someone else's name. Your record is fully restored, Camille had said, her voice even. Death certificate revoked. You're officially you again. I nodded, thanked her. Walked out the front doors and into the Virginia sun that felt too bright for how quiet I was inside. They didn't come. Not a call, not a message, not a half-hearted glance from the back of the courtroom. No one from my family showed up. But that silence didn't sting anymore. It simply confirmed what I'd known all along. Some people don't deserve your attention, even when they're crumbling. Callista was fined, a tidy number. Enough to sting, not enough to destroy. But her foundation was shuttered. Her speaking engagements dried up. Every time she tried to pivot her brand into something new, mental health, grief awareness, digital legacy work, the comment section reminded her of the truth. You lied about your sister. You made money off her fake death. Why would anyone trust you again? Verena quietly disappeared from every charity board she once chaired. The same women who used to praise her for being the strongest mother in the room now whispered behind her back in PTA meetings and luncheons. As for Alban, he sold his firm, took a sabbatical. Rumors swirled, of course. Some said he went to a private island. Others believed he was living in a retirement community under a different name. I didn't care. Let them vanish into the margins. I had work to do. Back in Seattle, 1 month after the legal storm settled, I stood in front of a group of women in a small office space off Pike Street. The walls were bare, the furniture donated, but the energy in the room, it was thick with possibility. The Kincaid Trust for Reclaimed Women wasn't big, not yet, but it was real. Our first program helped women who'd been disowned by their families for reasons that should have never required punishment. Mental health diagnoses, inheritance disputes, or simply choosing a life different from what was expected. These weren't statistics. These were women like me. I'd met a woman whose parents removed her from the family will because she married outside their church, another whose brother convinced their mother she had dementia just to claim power of attorney, and one who, like me, was legally declared dead after leaving a toxic household. Her case hadn't made the news, no viral clip, no hashtags, just a void. That day, I stood behind a wooden podium and looked into their eyes. Sometimes, I said, closure doesn't come wrapped in an apology. It comes when you stop begging for a seat at a table that was never built for you. They nodded. Some cried. One clapped first. The rest followed. Afterward, someone handed me a bouquet of hydrangeas. Another slipped a handwritten thank you note into my hand, saying, "I didn't know I needed to hear someone else survive until you did." Later that night, I found myself digging through an old storage bin in my apartment. I wasn't looking for anything specific, maybe just some forgotten piece of myself. At the bottom, beneath a stack of college notebooks and one too many expired coupons, I found it. A letter, unsent, written to Callista. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and unfolded the creased paper. The ink was smudged in places, maybe from a glass of water or my fingers when I first wrote it. Maybe from tears. It was raw. Angry. Hopeful. Broken. "You could have just told me the truth," one line read. "You could have said you wanted the spotlight. I would have stepped aside." Another. "Do you remember when we used to build forts in the living room and pretend we were each other?" And the last one. "I still don't know if you loved me or just liked the idea of who I could have been if I hadn't made things so hard for you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I took a match, walked to the kitchen sink, and lit the corner. I watched the flames eat the words, curling the paper into ash. "You already took enough of me," I whispered. "You don't get the last word, too." The next morning, I drove past the old house. The lawn was trimmed, shutters freshly painted. A new family lived there now, kids' bikes in the yard, a Halloween wreath already on the door even though it was barely September. I didn't stop, didn't even slow down, just turned at the corner and kept going. There was no ceremony, no final goodbye. Just a breath, a release, because not everything needs to end with fireworks. Sometimes it's just knowing you've lived through what was meant to kill you and walked out carrying your own name, not theirs. Mine, Delith Kincaid, alive, whole, unapologetic, and free. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people who were supposed to love you the most. But healing doesn't always require an apology. Sometimes it's enough to choose yourself and walk away stronger. Have you ever had to rebuild your identity after someone tried to erase it? Tell me your story in the comments. I'm listening. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are more real-life stories coming that you won't want to miss.